The color drained from the banker's face like someone had pulled a plug. He looked from the simple, worn plastic card in his hand to my face, then back again. His eyes, magnified behind thick glasses, were wide with something that looked like fear. He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the hushed, marble-floored lobby. "Ma'am," he stammered, his voice a low whisper. "Where did you get this card?" My life with Richard had been built on a foundation of carefully curated illusions, an edifice of polished surfaces and hollow laughter. Our home was a testament to his success, a sprawling modernist house, a glass box perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, with interiors so minimalist they felt sterile. The manicured garden was a pristine tableau he never touched, and I was forbidden to change, its perfection a constant, unspoken rebuke. We hosted dinner parties every other Friday, a ritual of performative success. The wine was always a vintage I couldn't pronounce, the conversation a predictable symphony of Richard's latest venture, his newest acquisition, his brilliant forecast of the market's next turn. One such evening, the air thick with the scent of expensive canopies and the hum of forced conviviality, Richard held court by the floor-to-ceiling windows. He gestured expansively at the glittering city lights below, a proprietary glint in his eyes. "Our empire, darling," he denounced to a group of rapt investors, his arms sweeping around the room to include me, a mere prop in his grand narrative. I was the silent partner in his performance, the smiling wife in a designer dress whose only job was to refill crystal glasses and nod approvingly at his pronouncements. Later, as I cleared the dessert plates, he'd cornered me in the kitchen, a half-empty bottle of Chateau Lafite Rothschild in his hand. "Clara, darling, you were a little quiet tonight," he'd purred, his breath smelling of rich wine and condescension. "Remember, a supportive wife is an asset, not a liability." He'd patted my hand, a dismissive gesture that stung more than any shout. "Every asset, every account, was in his name. It's just cleaner that way for tax purposes," he'd said, patting my hand again, this time a slow, deliberate stroke. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." I believed him, or rather, I allowed myself to believe him, because it was infinitely easier than confronting the uncomfortable truth of my own gilded cage. My father, by stark contrast, lived in a world devoid of such polished lies. He was a retired librarian who resided in a tiny, rent-controlled apartment that always smelled of old books, pipe tobacco, and chamomile tea. He wore the same 3 threadbare sweaters in rotation, each mended with loving precision, and his greatest luxury was buying hardcover books instead of patiently waiting for the paperback edition. Richard despised him, labeling him a failure, a man with no ambition, completely blind to the quiet dignity that defined my father's existence. But to me, my father was the steadfast anchor of my life. He never judged, he only listened, his eyes warm and understanding. The last time I saw him, a month before he passed away from a sudden, merciful heart attack, he'd pressed a plain white envelope into my hand. "Clara, keep this safe. Use it when you really need it." "I love you, Dad," he'd whispered, his hand frail on mine, surprisingly strong in its grip. I'd tucked it into an old shoebox, buried deep in the back of my closet, assuming it contained a few $100s he'd painstakingly saved. An emergency fund from a man who, to my knowledge, had never had an emergency beyond a lost library book. The end of my marriage came on a Tuesday. I remember the oppressive grayness of the sky, the rain slicking the glass walls of our home, making it feel less like a sanctuary and more like a fishbowl, exposing me to an indifferent world. Richard stood by the fireplace, the flames reflecting off his impossibly polished shoes. He wasn't yelling. He was worse. He was calm, his voice a chilling monotone. "Clara, you need to leave now." His words were cold, detached, as if he were discussing a business deal that had soured, an unfortunate but necessary write-off. There was another woman, of course, younger, sharper, one of his ambitious new associates. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just looked impatient, eager for me to vacate the space I once shared. "But this is my home. Richard, we built this together," I said, hating how small, how pathetic my voice sounded against the vast indifference of the room. "You contributed nothing of value," he stated, a simple, brutal fact in his mind. "Everything is in my name. The house, the cars, the accounts. Our lawyers have been over it. There is nothing for you." He gestured to my purse on the marble counter with a flick of his wrist. Your personal effects are in the guest room. Take what you can carry. A car will be here in 20 minutes to take you wherever you want to go. But I don't have anywhere to go, I said, the words catching in my throat, a dry, dusty whisper. He just shrugged, turning his back to me to meticulously adjust a painting on the wall that was already perfectly aligned. The finality of that gesture was more devastating than any shout. He had already moved on. I was just a piece of furniture he was having removed, an unwanted relic of a life he was eager to discard. I packed a single suitcase, my hands trembling so badly I could barely zip it. As I left, my reflection in the glass walls was a ghostly figure. I saw her watching from an upstairs window, a faint silhouette against the light, already settling into my life. He didn't even walk me to the door. The 3 days that followed before I walked through those formidable bank doors, before my entire life turned upside down, were a blur of cheap motel rooms and the acrid, cloying smell of disinfectant. I had $43 in my purse, all that remained of 15 years of shared prosperity. Everything else was gone. The joint credit cards were declined with a humiliating buzz. My phone service was cut without warning. I was a ghost, erased from the life I'd helped build, deemed irrelevant. I spent hours staring at the water-stained ceiling, a hollow roar in my ears, the sound of my life imploding. Despair is a physical thing. It's a weight that presses down on your chest until you can barely breathe, a cold hand squeezing your heart. I tried calling the few friends I had, but the calls wouldn't go through. My phone, once a lifeline, was now a dead weight. Humiliation simmered beneath the surface of my raw grief. I walked into a few storefronts, desperate to find any kind of work, but my resume was non-existent, my skills non-transferable to a world beyond hosting dinner parties. Who would hire a woman with no recent work history, no references, and a deer-in-headlights stare? I realized with sickening clarity that Richard had ensured I was utterly dependent, rendering me helpless the moment he cut the cord. On the third night, huddled under a threadbare blanket that offered no warmth, the memory of my father's envelope surfaced like a forgotten prayer. It was a desperate, grasping at straws kind of hope. What could possibly be in there? A few $100s? Maybe 1,000? It would be enough for a deposit on a tiny apartment, enough to give me a few weeks of breathing room. It was a lifeline, no matter how thin, a whisper of possibility in a suffocating darkness. I found the shoebox in the bottom of my suitcase, buried under sweaters. I no longer had a place to wear, a strange relic from a past life. Inside, the plain white envelope felt impossibly light, almost insubstantial. There was no letter. Just a generic-looking bank card with no name on it, only an account number, and a small handwritten note on a sticky tab. It had a 4-digit PIN and a simple message. For your new beginning, be smart, be happy. Dad. There was no bank name, just a logo I didn't recognize, a stylized mountain peak, stark and elegant. A quick search on the motel's spotty Wi-Fi, which cost me a precious few dollars, revealed it was a private Swiss wealth management firm with a small, discreet branch in the city's financial district. It felt like a cruel joke, a surreal hallucination, brought on by exhaustion and despair. My father, the humble librarian who clipped coupons and patched his own shoes, with a Swiss bank account? The absurdity of it was almost too much to bear. The next morning, driven by a flicker of desperate curiosity, I walked the 40 blocks downtown because I couldn't afford a cab, my worn shoes feeling inadequate for the polished streets. The bank was an imposing tower of dark glass and steel, soaring into the gray November sky, with no ostentatious signs, no flamboyant declarations of wealth. It was the kind of building you could walk by 1,000 times and never notice, designed for anonymity. I felt small and shabby as the polished brass doors hissed open, admitting me into a hushed world of marble and hushed whispers. I stood in line behind people in tailored suits, their briefcases gleaming, clutching my worn purse like a talisman, the plain plastic card feeling like a hot coal in my palm. When I finally reached the teller, I pushed the card across the counter. I need to check the balance on this account, I mumbled, my voice barely audible above the low murmur of the lobby. The teller, a young woman with a practiced, polite smile, took the card. Her smile faltered as she looked at it, then at the computer screen. She typed something into her keyboard, her fingers hovering. Her eyes widened, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. She typed again, more slowly this time. Then she looked up at me, her professional veneer completely gone, replaced by naked shock. "One moment, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, and picked up her phone, turning her back to me, her hand shielding the receiver. A minute later, a man in a severe dark suit, whose presence seemed to command the very air around him, was at her side. He was the branch manager, Mr. Evans, and it was his face that had gone completely unnervingly white. He looked at me, then at the card he now held, and then back at me, his gaze intense. "Ma'am, please, come with me. This is it. This is a mistake. My father found this card, or it was a promotional gimmick, and I'm about to be arrested for fraud. My life is over." The thought wasn't panicked. It was just a dull, resigned certainty. Of course this would happen. Of course this was the final, inevitable plummet. Two silent, imposing security guards materialized seemingly out of the marble itself, flanking us without a word. Mr. Evans led me away from the public area, down a hushed hallway carpeted in deep pile, and into a large, wood-paneled office. The air was thick with the scent of old leather, polished wood, and the intangible aroma of immense money. He closed the heavy door with a soft click, and the silence was absolute, insulating us from the world outside. He gestured for me to sit in a vast leather armchair, but he himself remained standing, pacing restlessly behind his enormous antique desk. He kept glancing at the card, clutched in his hand, as if it might at any moment burst into flames or bite him. "Ma'am, Clara, is it? Your father was Arthur Finch?" he asked, his voice strained, almost reverent. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak, a single croak escaping my lips. "I've worked at this bank for 30 years, he said quietly, his gaze distant, as if recalling ancient history. "I've seen a lot of things. High-stakes deals, fortunes made and lost. But this account is legendary within these walls. Your father opened it in 1988. He made a single deposit." He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath, as if steeling himself. "We will, of course, need to verify your identity. A formality. We have your father's instructions here. Very specific instructions, Clara. Instructions that have been followed to the letter for decades." He slid a thick, surprisingly weighty file across the gleaming desk. "He stipulated that the account details were only to be revealed to you upon presentation of this card and a matching photographic ID. He also stipulated that it could not be accessed by any other party, under any circumstances, including marriage." His foresight was truly remarkable. The verification process took an excruciating hour. They took my fingerprints, scanning them into a discreet biometric device. They scanned my driver's license multiple times. They asked me questions about my father that only I would know. The name of his childhood dog, Buttons, a scruffy terrier he'd adored. The street he grew up on, Elmwood Lane. His favorite flavor of ice cream, rum raisin. The whole time, Mr. Evans treated me with a kind of reverent awe that was deeply unsettling, a deference usually reserved for royalty or titans of industry. Finally, he sat back down, folding his hands on his desk, his expression a mixture of profound relief and lingering disbelief. He turned his computer monitor toward me. "Everything is in order, Clara. The account is yours. Your father's meticulous planning has ensured it." On the screen was a simple account statement. At the top was the account number from the card, stark against the digital white. At the bottom was a balance. It was a long number. A number with 2 commas. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The digits blurred, refusing to make sense. It was like reading a foreign language, incomprehensible. "That can't be right," I said, my voice barely working. A fragile whisper. That's a mistake." "It's no mistake, Clara," Mr. Evans said softly, his voice still tinged with awe. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen, his hand shaking slightly. "That says $47,212,341.88. I stared. The world tilted on its axis, then spun violently. $47 million. My father, the man who patched his own shoes and used tea bags twice, the librarian who cherished old books more than new money, was a multi-millionaire. The room started to spin faster, the rich wood paneling blurring into a dizzying vortex. All the air seemed to have been sucked out of it, leaving me gasping. The crushing weight on my chest from the past 3 days was suddenly, miraculously gone, replaced by a dizzying, terrifying lightness. I felt like I was going to float away, detach from my own body. I gripped the thick leather arms of the armchair, digging my nails in, anchoring myself to reality, to the undeniable solidity of the present moment. How? Why? He lived in poverty. He let me think he had nothing. He watched me marry Richard, watched Richard control every penny, every decision, and he said nothing. He could have helped us. He could have eased our lives, provided for my future. But that wasn't it, was it? He didn't trust Richard. He never did. He saw the man I refused to see, the true nature beneath the polished facade. Your father was a very shrewd man, Clara. Mr. Evans continued, seemingly sensing my turmoil, reading the questions in my stunned eyes. The initial deposit was just under $2 million. It was an inheritance from his own father that he never spoke of, a quiet fortune he held in reserve. He invested it in a small, obscure tech company in the late 80s, a company that built operating systems, a fledgling startup with a brilliant but untested vision. My blood ran cold, a sudden chilling realization. I knew the company he was talking about. It was one of the biggest, most dominant corporations on the planet now, its logo ubiquitous on every screen, every device. My father had been one of its very first investors, a quiet visionary who saw potential where others saw only risk. And he never touched a dime. He left it to grow, a secret financial acorn that had become a mighty oak, its roots deep and strong, waiting patiently, waiting for the one day he knew would come. The day I would need it, the day I would be alone, stripped bare, and desperate. There's one more thing you should know, Clara, Mr. Evans said, his expression turning grim, his voice dropping to a serious tone. Per our security protocol, we log all inquiries about high-value dormant accounts. 6 weeks ago, a man came in here asking about any potential assets held by Arthur Finch. He said he was his son-in-law, acting on your behalf to consolidate your father's estate, claiming you were too distraught to handle the paperwork. Richard? I breathed, the name a bitter taste on my tongue. Yes, Richard. We told him, of course, that we had no information to provide, citing our strict confidentiality clauses, but he was very persistent. He presented some documents, trying to claim power of attorney, claiming marital rights. He knew something, or he suspected strongly enough to start digging, even before your father was laid to rest. The realization crashed over me with the force of a physical blow, sharper than the shock of the money itself. Richard hadn't just left me. He had systematically dismantled my life, rendered me destitute, while simultaneously hunting for a treasure he believed my father had hidden. He had stripped me of everything, made me penniless and vulnerable, so that if I ever did stumble upon this money, I'd be too broken, too grateful, to fight him for it. Or perhaps he thought I'd come crawling back to him, and he could then seize control of it, absorbing it into his own empire. It wasn't just cheating. It wasn't just greed. It was a calculated, cruel campaign to break me, to ensure my utter dependence and subservience. He wanted me desperate and broken so I'd never think to look for this, so I'd never have the strength to claim it. The anger that filled me was cold and pure, a freezing fire. It burned away the last vestiges of shock and the lingering grief for my old life, leaving behind a hard, crystalline clarity. He hadn't just taken my past and my present, he had tried to steal my future, a future my father had sacrificed his own comfort to protect, a legacy crafted from love and foresight. The first phone call came 2 days later. It was my sister, Diane. We were never close, our paths diverging sharply in adolescence. She had my father's ambition, but none of his quiet humility, always fixated on status and material gain. She'd always resented my quiet life, my marriage to the successful Richard, convinced I'd somehow lucked into a privilege she deserved more. Her voice, when it finally reached me, was sharp, laced with an unmistakable envy she didn't even bother to hide behind a veil of false concern. Clara? I heard the most ridiculous rumor. Someone from Dad's old neighborhood called me. Something about Dad and a secret bank account. Richard called me too. He's absolutely losing his mind. He says it's all some kind of fraud. I was in a hotel suite now, one where the towels were thick and plush, and the silence was a balm to my frayed nerves. I had already hired a financial advisor and a lawyer, two sharp, competent women who were already building a fortress of legal and financial protections around my newfound assets. It's not a rumor, Diane, I said, my own voice steady, surprisingly calm. It's real, and it's all mine. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, a sharp intake of breath. Then, her tone shifted, becoming predatory. The false concern vanished entirely, replaced by raw, naked entitlement, a familiar, grating sound. Well, I don't understand why you think you deserve all of it, Clara. I'm his daughter, too. He barely had a relationship with me because of you, always favoring you. He barely had a relationship with you, Diane, I replied calmly, the words precise and unyielding. Because you asked him for money every time you saw him and called him a failure when he said no. You measured his worth by his bank account, not by his character. The accusation hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. It was the truth, and we both knew it. I told her that, out of respect for our father's memory, I would ensure she was comfortable, that I would set up a modest trust for her future, enough to live on without working, but not enough to squander. But it wasn't enough. For people like Diane and Richard, driven by insatiable greed, it was never enough. They saw generosity as a weakness to exploit, not a gift to cherish. Then came the call I was truly waiting for. Richard, his voice was completely different now. Gone was the cold, unfeeling executive, the dismissive husband. In his place was a desperate, pleading man, his carefully constructed composure shattered. Clara, baby, I've been so worried. I heard you left the motel, thank God. Where are you? We can fix this. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Please, just come home. Oh, you made a mistake, all right, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. His tone hardened instantly, the fake remorse evaporating like morning mist. Don't play games, Clara. I know about the money. I've spoken to a lawyer, a very expensive one. That money was discovered during our marriage. It's marital property. I have rights. I'll sue you, Clara. I'll take you for every penny, every single one of those $47 million. You won't see a dime after I'm through with you. You do that, Richard, I said, and calmly hung up, the click of the receiver a period to that chapter of my life. The weeks that followed were a crash course in a world I never knew existed, a labyrinth of legal documents and financial strategies. My legal team, led by Ms. Alvarez, a woman with a mind like a steel trap and an unwavering gaze, was formidable. They showed me the airtight legal framework my father had created, a meticulously crafted trust, a clear designation of heirs, and specific clauses that explicitly declared the inheritance as a premarital asset of his own, which had passed directly to me, bypassing any marital claims from Richard. His case was baseless, a scare tactic designed to intimidate, and it quickly unraveled. But then Ms. Alvarez laid another, thicker file on the polished mahogany table, her expression grave. This, she said, tapping the folder with a perfectly manicured nail, is different. In setting up your financial structures, we did a deep dive into his public lawsuits against you gave us ample reason to investigate his financial dealings. We found irregularities. Significant ones: wire fraud, tax evasion, a network of shell corporations in various offshore havens. He hasn't just been hiding assets from you, he's been hiding them from the government for years, manipulating accounts, falsifying records. She pushed the documents across the table towards me. It was a loaded weapon, aimed directly at Richard's life, his freedom, his entire empire. All I had to do was pull the trigger, turn the file over to the authorities, ruin him completely, irrevocably. Part of me wanted to do it. Part of me wanted to watch him lose everything and feel exactly what I'd felt. The cold grip of despair, the shattering of a carefully constructed life, the utter helplessness. I saw his face in my mind, vivid and sharp, the smug superiority in our living room, the cold dismissal, his back turned as I walked out. I thought of the cheap motel, the acrid smell of disinfectant, the feeling of absolute hopelessness that had choked me. The weapon was in my hands, a righteous instrument of revenge. I could have my retribution. I could tear down the empire he stole, salt the earth so nothing would ever grow there again, leaving him with less than I had been left with. For a full day, I savored that thought, letting the rage and the hatred wash over me. A dark, satisfying tide. I pictured his downfall, his public humiliation, the utter collapse of his carefully constructed world. It would be justice, pure and undiluted. But then I thought of my father, the man who lived a life of quiet dignity and immense, secret generosity. He had given me this money not as a weapon, not as a tool for destruction, but as a shield. A tool to build a new life, to nurture, not to destroy an old one. What would he have wanted? Revenge wasn't his way. His power lay in quiet strength, in enduring, in providing, in rising above. Was I being a fool? Was this weakness? A part of me screamed that I was letting him get away with it, that true strength was in fighting back, in punishing those who hurt you. It felt almost like betraying my own pain. But a quieter voice, one that sounded uncannily like my father's gentle counsel, whispered that true strength was in choosing not to become the monster you were fighting, in finding a path that elevated you, rather than dragging you down to their level. It wasn't about forgiveness, not yet, but about a profound act of self-preservation, a choice to protect my own soul. The next day, I met with Alvarez. No, I said, pushing the incriminating documents away, sliding them back across the table. I'm not going to destroy him. Not like this. She looked at me, her expression unreadable, a flicker of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps respect, in her sharp eyes. Clara, he would not offer you the same courtesy. He would burn your world to ashes without a second thought. I know, I said, the realization settling deep in my bones, and that's precisely why I'm not going to do it. It would make me like him. My father gave me a gift, a chance to be someone better, to build something meaningful. I'm not going to squander it on hate, on bitterness. I will build my own legacy, one he could never touch. Instead of a weapon, I chose to build. Over the next 6 months, working closely with my financial team and a new board of directors, we established the Finch Foundation. It wasn't simple. There were mountains of paperwork, fundraising challenges, endless meetings with city officials and community leaders. We weren't just throwing money at problems. We were building sustainable solutions. Our mission was clear: to provide comprehensive legal aid, safe transitional housing, and essential financial literacy training for women who had been left in situations like mine, financially controlled, emotionally manipulated, and then brutally discarded. My father's old apartment building, the one that smelled of books and tea, became the perfect symbol. I bought it, pouring foundation funds into its complete renovation. It was transformed from a rundown relic into the foundation's first transitional housing complex, a safe harbor for women rebuilding their lives, a place where they could find stability and support. One of our first residents was Maria, a woman who had fled an abusive husband, who had drained their joint accounts and left her with nothing but debt. Watching Maria, with our lawyers' help, navigate the legal system, find a stable job, and eventually move into her own apartment with her children, was more fulfilling than any amount of revenge could have offered. Richard's lawsuits against me came, of course. They were loud, messy, and public, dominating the society pages for a while. He painted me as a greedy opportunist who had been hiding family money from him, a disloyal wife. For a while it was stressful, the constant headlines, the legal wrangling, but my father's planning was perfect, a legal fortress against his every claim. Every case Richard brought was thrown out, deemed frivolous. He burned through his money on lawyers, his rage making him reckless, blinding him to the inevitable. His business partners grew wary of the constant negative publicity and his increasingly erratic behavior. Investors began to pull out. His empire began to crumble, not because I attacked it directly, but because its foundations were rotten to begin with, undermined by his own hubris and fraud, exposed by the very recklessness he used to try and destroy me. The true end for him came from an entirely different direction. The detailed financial irregularities that Alvarez and her team had uncovered had been quietly shared with a federal investigative agency, not directly by me or my legal team, but as a standard part of their due diligence when protecting my assets, especially in light of Richard's very public and desperate attempts to claim money he wasn't entitled to. His reckless lawsuits had opened his entire financial history to scrutiny. Perhaps it was a disgruntled employee, or a spurned business partner who saw an opening in the chaos of his public downfall. An anonymous tip corroborating much of our information was then sent to the IRS. The tip detailed the very same shell corporations and tax schemes Alvarez had found. A federal investigation was launched. It was swift and brutal. His assets were frozen. He was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and tax evasion, his carefully constructed facade imploding with devastating speed. The woman he'd left me for vanished the moment the money dried up, a testament to her true loyalties. I saw him one last time, on the courthouse steps, surrounded by news cameras flashing relentlessly, a hungry mob of reporters shouting questions. He looked haggard and defeated, his expensive suit rumpled, his face pale and drawn. Our eyes met across the tumultuous crowd. There was no anger in his gaze now, no arrogance, just a hollow emptiness, a profound despair. He finally understood. I hadn't needed to destroy him. He had done it to himself. With every greedy decision, every cruel act, every lie. His phone call from jail was pathetic, a desperate plea for help. He was begging me to post his bail, to help with his exorbitant legal fees. "Please, Clara," he'd whimpered, his voice reedy and broken. "You have so much. What's a few million to you? For what we had, for our life together." "No, Richard," I said, the line feeling clear and strong between us, unburdened by past expectations. "I'm not going to save you from the consequences of your own choices. That's something only you can do." I hung up and never heard from him again. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even satisfaction. Not truly. It was simply closure. The clean severing of a toxic cord. I thought about power. Richard thought power was about control, about having more than anyone else, about dominating and exploiting. My father knew what real power was. It was the power to endure. The power to give. The power to build something that would outlast you. Something meaningful and good. Today, the Finch Foundation has helped over 200 women get back on their feet, providing them with the tools and resources to reclaim their independence. I attend every graduation ceremony from our financial literacy program, watching women, once broken, now stand tall and confident. I see the hope in their eyes, the same hope that I felt when I walked out of that bank, a new world unfurling before me. I kept my father's tiny apartment for myself. It's my refuge, my sanctuary in the bustling city, a quiet counterpoint to the larger work of the foundation. It still smells of old books and chamomile tea. Sometimes I sit in his worn armchair and read his favorite novels, feeling his presence in the quiet warmth of the space. I never touch the principle of the inheritance. I live a comfortable life, but a simple one, carefully managing the investment returns to fund the foundation and my own needs. The $47 million remains, growing silently, a testament to a father's enduring love, a shield for generations to come, a legacy of profound generosity. I learned from a man who knew that the best revenge wasn't destroying your enemies, but becoming someone they could never touch. I was free, truly free, not because I had money, but because I had found a purpose beyond myself, a calling that resonated with my deepest values. Richard tried to leave me with nothing, but in doing so he cleared the path for me to find the true legacy my father had left me. It wasn't just the money. It was a profound lesson in character, in quiet strength, in the power of enduring love. "You gave me freedom, Dad," I whispered one evening, looking out the window of his old apartment at the city lights, knowing he would somehow hear me. Real freedom. The freedom to choose who I want to be. And I choose to be like you.